Happy 2015, everyone, and hello to all my recent subscribers. More new videos are on the way, but I thought it would be fun to do something a bit different to kick things off this year. Since I've started working entertainment stuff into my channel more, like the Awful Christian Albums series, I don't imagine it will be too unusual to do this list of some of my favorite things from 2014. Along the way, I will also toss in a handful of my least favorites. Of course, keep in mind that these are just my views on things, so naturally there will be differences of opinion. But I would like to hear from you guys as well on what you enjoyed from 2014, in case I've missed anything possibly worth checking out. Back in February, Bill Nye the Science Guy debated creationist nut Ken Ham at the equally nutty Creationist Museum in Kentucky. While I didn't get to hear the full-length debate, I heard a large portion of it and shared my thoughts in a blog post I'll link to in the video description. Why is this among my favorites? Firstly, we're talking about Bill Nye, who is just a wonderful science communicator and someone I grew up watching as a kid. I see him in much the same way I see Eugenie Scott, very knowledgeable of the science, yet also keenly aware of how to engage an audience. I've listened to a number of creation and evolution debates where even big-name scientists have not fared well because they're caught off guard by their opponent's tactics. Nye was not only prepared for Ken Ham's misdirections, but he did an excellent job of promoting interest in real science not gleaned from the pages of primitive religious texts. Watching my Facebook feed during the debate and seeing the reactions to it online and in the media afterwards restored some of my hope for humanity. It wasn't the monumental trouncing many would have liked to see, but I think it served as a good reminder of the issues and how religious interests work tirelessly to gain a foothold in our educational systems. This second event I'm listing coincides with a movie, but also a book and a song, and it's being included under none of these categories because all were absolutely terrible. I'm talking, of course, about God's Not Dead. Now, I realize with a lead-up like that, you might be thinking this is one of those least favorites I mentioned, but surprisingly, it's not. Despite the jaw-droppingly horribleness of the movie, and the book, and the song, an area of conversation opened up because of God's Not Dead, one that frequently is suppressed as taboo among friends, family, co-workers, and acquaintances. At least in my experience, I found that the movie presented me with an opportunity to talk to people who referenced it about things they wouldn't normally discuss so openly. And in its hateful bigotry, it weirdly gave me a shining example to use for addressing many of my own criticisms of religion, as well as popular misconceptions of atheism. It also inspired Dan Fink to write an amazing resource of commentaries pertinent to subjects raised by the film. Last, for events, I'd have to say the biggest one for me in 2014 would be the long-awaited airing of the Cosmos series with Neil deGrasse Tyson. This was an event and not just a show because it was extremely well promoted, it brought scientific and religious issues to public discourse, it told enchanting stories of some of the giants of history, and it was a visually beautiful and intellectually provocative exploration into some of the great mysteries of modern science. It may not be perfect, but it rekindled a deep love in me for the inquiring mind that dares to dream big and think critically. I didn't see a lot of movies in 2014 that really grabbed my attention, but there were some, and as a horror movie fanatic, my first mention has to go to a little limited-release Australian film called The Babadook. Prior to watching it, I'd come across some of the hype from critics, seen a trailer, and though I had worries it might be another case like Sinister, where the praise would die down drastically after a wider release, I found myself, for the first time in a long time, actually breathless in anticipation during parts of the movie. The creature in the children's book that bears its name are refreshingly unique, and the film manages to avoid a good deal of horror movie cliches while delivering its own scares in a building, subtle manner that walks a thin line between supernatural and psychological terror. Though it won't affect everyone the same way, The Babadook is one of those rare horror films that doesn't rely heavily on mindless tropes or blood and guts, nor does it force-feed you a thinly veiled message. Having been praised even by the director of The Exorcist, this may be one you'll have to see for yourself. The next favorite of mine probably won't surprise anyone. I went into Guardians of the Galaxy knowing pretty much nothing about the comics or the characters, let alone the plot, and just had a blast. I've seen a lot of Marvel films, and some I have liked, but Guardians just brought a winning combination of humor, action, and intrigue to the screen that the others seldom capture, in my opinion. Case in point, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was one of the dumbest, corniest, and twilightiest movies I saw in 2014. And yeah, I know it was Sony and not Marvel that was responsible for that crap fest, but it still illustrates what I mean. Guardians had a great cast, an awesome Blade Runner-style setting, and neither took itself too seriously nor made itself too cheesy. Third on my list is one that I've only recently seen, and feel like I may have to revisit again sometime to get a good grasp of it. Interstellar was another film I went into without knowing much, and I was taken on a gorgeous and mind-bending journey, as I hoped would be the case. Interestingly, some of the plot felt familiar, and I was able to guess at where it was headed a couple times, but I still very much enjoyed seeing how the film would flesh things out, and that in and of itself was amusing in light of some of the movie's themes. Scientifically, Interstellar seemed to only take minor liberties, and aside from one or two mildly cheesy, new-agey sentimental moments, it wove an endearing story between a father and daughter in a fairly believable sci-fi world. In fourth, I've got to include the Lego Movie as a Paragon Kids film. I went to see it with my girlfriend and the boys and found it wonderfully creative, funny, and charming, everything a Lego Movie should be, really. While it has a constant energy that becomes a little much by the end, the runtime helps keep it within bounds, as do the real-life moments that take a breather away from Legoland every now and then. Because of its clever writing and all-star cast, the Lego Movie can be fun for kids of all ages, even those cynical adults among us. Lastly, in contrast to the aforementioned, I have to talk about Transformers: Age of Extinction, which was probably one of the worst movies I watched all year, next to God's Not Dead. Like the Lego Movie, my girlfriend and I saw it with the boys, but had to turn it off without finishing it once the boys were asleep due to its piss-poor writing and blatant sexism. The tiny handful of Michael Bay films I've seen have all been bad, but this one is just next-level garbage. Yahoo has an article on the 17 cheesiest lines from the movie, but the highlight for me has to be the response Lockdown gives to someone who tells him of a saying they have on Earth. The robot replies, "I also have a saying. I don't care." A drinking game based on the stupidest parts of the movie could well lead to liver failure with a punishing runtime of 2 hours and 45 minutes. In 2014, my reading list consisted mostly of older books, but there was one new one that stood out. Bart Ehrman's How Jesus Became God is a fascinating trip through the development of early Christian theology that, as the subtitle says, exalted Jesus from Jewish preacher to Son of God and God incarnate. As always, Ehrman's writing is both accessible and chock full of informative scholarship, but the two chapters of most interest to me were the ones on the resurrection, where he explains how his own views have recently changed. How Jesus Became God provides further insight into that climate of first-century Judea that I personally find endlessly spellbinding, and also serves up many opportunities for contemplating one's reasons for accepting or rejecting the divinity and resurrection of Jesus. My games list is much like my reading list, albeit I have been exposed to more games of the year without playing them. I generally follow Metacritic scores and user reviews before committing to any game, and I've started watching LPs of some I'm skeptical about. That's why I feel confident in saying I've seen enough of Evil Within, Advanced Warfare, and Titanfall to know that they probably wouldn't be on this list even if I had played them myself, for various reasons. Others, like Destiny and Wolfenstein, are ones I look forward to giving a go. However, one 2014 game I was pretty excited about and did end up playing was Alien Isolation. As a huge fan of the first two films in the franchise, and a fan of horror games like Amnesia and Outlast, Alien seemed promising indeed, and I feel it delivered almost all around. It's more challenging than Amnesia, less frustrating than Outlast, and has a stunningly beautiful retro sci-fi look to it. Though there are a few comparatively boring parts in it, the alien and the gameplay mechanics don't disappoint, and I think it deserves a place of recognition as one of a very slim few number of licensed movie games able to live up to its title. Last but certainly not least, most of you likely know I'm big on music, specifically the darker, heavier end of it. Every year I watch for the metal albums making waves, and 2014 had a fair share. First up for me will have to be Unisonic's Light of Dawn. I'm quite the fan of 80s heavy metal like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, as well as the genre it got refined into called power metal. One of the best-known European bands to come out of the heyday of Maiden and Priest was Helloween. Their two Keepers albums are widely regarded as classics, and Unisonic is the first real collaboration between guitarist Kai Hansen and singer Michael Kiske since the latter left the band in the early 90s. Light of Dawn is the group's second record, and it's a fantastic diversity of old and new styles that, in my opinion, blows the new Priest album out of the water, as well as anything Maiden's done for some time. The guitar riffs and vocal melodies are infectious, the lyrics are meaningful yet fun, and there's just a sense of soul and energy to every performance that makes this my top pick of 2014. Next up will be Krieg's Machine's Enemy of Man. I've been waiting on a new full-length from these Polish black metal monsters ever since their excellent 2005 release, Altered States of Divinity. Enemy of Man continues through the same territory of dissonant and entrancing musical works, accompanied by blasphemous and chaotic liturgies that will be familiar to fans of Watain, Deathspell Omega, and Sargeist. For me, this one delivers a reverent kind of rage matched only by Onskop's Dodon's Evangelium. Without a doubt, it won't sit well with everyone, but that would not be its intent anyway. Third is Retribution by the progressive rock metal band Nightingale. Dan Swano is one of those unbelievably talented jack-of-all-trades in the metal genre, and this latest work of his serves as a reminder of that fact. At times sounding like Opeth and Catatonia, at others sounding like Spock's Beard and Porcupine Tree, Retribution is an inspiring, varied, and memorable listening experience. It may take a bit to grow on you and may seem inconsistent in what it's trying to be on occasion, but there's pretty much something for everyone, and unlike a lot of prog albums, it doesn't try to be anything too grandiose. As an exercise in thoughtful humility, I feel this is really where the record succeeds. Finally, I have to include Evergrey's Hymns for the Broken, which I consider one of their best works in years. Evergrey's unique brand of progressive metal really stands out in their first 4 albums, but took a turn to a more modern and simplified form thereafter. Hymns keeps some of the latter in place while also recalling the former to create the emotionally charged, less pretentious powerhouse it seems like the band has been striving for over the last several years. Although there are tracks that do well on their own, it's best heard as a whole, which can be problematic as the runtime is 61 minutes. Repeat listens have given me more to like in individual songs, but my biggest complaint would be that some of Hymns still sounds like filler. Even so, if you like the prog metal stylings of Dream Theater or Symphony X, give Evergrey a try. Other records that get an honorable mention from me would be At the Gates' melodic death metal comeback At War with Reality, and Threshold's gorgeous new prog metal piece For the Journey. That's all I've got for my favorites of 2014 at the moment, but feel free to share some of your own in the comments below. I'd also like to throw it out there that I do have an Amazon wishlist, as well as a PayPal donation option for those who'd like to support the stuff I do on YouTube, on my site, and on my blog. I know it's a bit late for Christmas, but between putting myself through college, working a job, and finding time to produce content, any support is always much appreciated. New videos are on the way, including more podcast episodes, so I look forward to sharing all that with you guys in 2015. Thanks as always.